Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Warrior Knights of the Frozen Throne expansion review. So, quick disclaimers, as we mentioned on the other video that we did for Druid. This is obviously before the set comes out. We're going to be rating cards 1 to 5, but ultimately the ratings are not as important as what we're going to be saying about the cards, right? That's really where we're going to discuss whether the cards are going to be good, and we're going to be rating them on their viability, or playability, sorry. So in terms of whether they're actually going to be seeing play, a card might be really good, but if there's no support for it, then it
Yeah.
might not ultimately see play, and that's the big um, thing to note there. So it's not based on how good the cards are in a vacuum.
How card the good is.
Yes, how good the cards are in a vacuum. It's about how good they are given the other cards that exist and the other decks that we see. So, yeah, as always, well, not as always, but joined by Pandemonia, who
So
is somewhat of a warrior expert. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
I
you
don't know
play
about
lots of
expert.
control
I
warrior.
play a lot of warrior. Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
you
know about
played a lot
expert,
of
but
control warrior in particular.
yeah, I'm a warrior fan.
A warrior fan, yeah. You like going
Yes.
face with Pyro Warrior and like tanking up in the old days of
Oh, I used
Justicar,
to love
so
to thank you. Old school like control warrior. That is my favorite deck of all time.
yeah. Okay, so as with most of the classes, we're going to start off by discussing the new Death Knight. The Death Knight cards are hero cards that replace your hero with the new Death Knight version of the hero, which has a new hero power as well as usually some kind of effect when it comes into play. So for Warrior, we have Scourge Lord Garrosh, which is a 8 mana legendary hero card. It gives you 5 armor as well when it comes to play, which is far more relevant in Warrior than in the other classes, but so it gives you
There's
5
actual
armor.
synergy.
Yeah, it gives you 5 armor, and it also has Battle Cry. Equip a 4/3 Shadow Morn that also damages adjacent minions. So the way this works is you get a 4/3 weapon, and let's say you hit. There's two or three 2/2s on the board. If you hit the one in the middle, it'll hit the other damage. It'll damage the other minions as well, but obviously you won't take damage from the
There are
other
really a
two
few
minions.
cards
So
which do that. There was that Minotaur Alpha, I think.
yeah,
But ultimately, I think it's something
and
that
Foe
eventually
Reaper
Blizzard
did
will
a
make
kind of
a
similar thing.
mechanic.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of like a cleave mechanic. That's kind of what I'm gonna call it. Like that seems
Yeah.
to be pretty much what it is. Uh, cleave, and then Scourge Lord Garrosh also gives you a new hero power, which is Blade Storm, which is 2 mana, and it reads deal 1 damage to all minions. So
So basically, a
essentially
whirlwind.
Whirlwind. Yeah.
Yeah.
So 2 mana Whirlwind. Uh, Obviously, Warrior does have a lot of synergy. This does damage your minions as well, and that's really where a lot of Warrior's Whirlwind synergy comes in, as well as helping activate cards like Sleep with the Fishes and cards like that in a more control-oriented deck.
Yeah.
So, how do you feel about Scourge Lord Garrosh?
Uh, okay, he looks cool. His weapon is really cool. I will say it's a bit like I'm a bit like the actual hero power for me is a bit underwhelming.
Yeah.
I will be very honest. I do like I said, I think it's a bit underwhelming. But I mean, we'll have to see, right, in terms of whether I, I don't know. It's
I think ultimately
uh,
the Whirlwind hero power is kind of like it has certain scenarios where you can see it would be good, right? Let's say against living mana. Okay, cool. Well, you can in 2 turns you can clear it up, but
yeah.
a lot of the time, like there's diminishing returns to whirlwinds, and at some point you want to be on the board yourself. And if you're not on the board, if you're on the board, then your hero power becomes ultimately useless. And let's say you're playing a control deck as well, if you need the health, then you could lose a lot of value when you're now getting rid of your armor up hero power. And it's not like you're replacing it with Die Insect, which is ultimately ending the game. The Whirlwind or the Blade Storm hero power really isn't ending the game.
Yeah, you need more like you need to sit, you need to have like more decks in terms of the synergies, right?
Yeah.
So you need more, you need things like your Battle Rage, Acolyte of Pain. You need to have cards that are kind
Grim
of
Patron. I mean, RIP, yeah. Obviously not in standard anymore, but ultimately, like that is one of the synergies you would think of here, right? Like it would have
yeah,
been great with Patron, you would have
Yeah.
been able to, get more patrons on the board every turn, and that
And the
that's the
weapon
one.
is relevant, I think, as well. To be
Yeah.
very fair,
I
the
think
weapon.
that's the big talking point for Garrosh, for Scourge Lord Garrosh, right? Is the weapon. The weapon is exactly where he can find some play, and maybe as a tempo option is pretty good. You can remove multiple minions with the weapon in a few swings, and that's a really powerful effect. I think that's the big talking point here for Garrosh. I think you're going to end the game after playing Scourge Lord Garrosh by just having a commanding board presence, right? If they have small minions, you can clean some of them up with the whirlwind effect and then clean up the bigger minions with the weapon. And ultimately, that should hopefully leave you with a board that can finish the game for you, right? Because really, you're not going to wanting to go too long after playing this hero or
Yeah,
after
because it's
playing
not
this
like
Death Knight. And
Jiraxis,
yeah,
or
it,
it's not
it,
like
it isn't ending the game itself.
exactly.
It basically has the three weapon charges. That's I think if you're not ending the game by the time you use that third weapon charge, you're in trouble with this
Yeah, you are
player.
in a bit of trouble, I think.
Yeah. So ultimately, where do you see Scourge Lord Garrosh on our 1 to 5 rating system?
Uh, I'll put it at a 3 because I still think it has potential, whether it's in a control warrior or in a like a more temp warrior. I think.
Yeah.
I think there is potential.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it's also a 3, but leaning towards a 2. I think that's only the weapon. That's the only thing that's holding it up for me. I think that all the synergy right now for the dealing damage to your minions sucks. The best scenario is basically Battle Rage, in my opinion, right now, out of all the
Yeah.
cards that we have. And I think that really, if you're building a deck that's based around that synergy, there's a lot of other cards that are going to be come down earlier and be more important. And doing this on turn 9 or 10 with that hero power is really not that strong. Like the hero power
Yeah.
also is just the whirlwind effect is worse late into the game. Like everything about it, 8 mana for this really just doesn't seem worth it. The only cool thing is that Shadowmourne weapon.
Yeah. I mean that's.
Yeah. So speaking of synergies for damaging minions, we have the other warrior legendary,
You don't like
Rotface.
it.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that. Rotface is an 8 mana 4/6, so a great stat line to start with. Hashtag sarcasm. Um, he is a legendary minion, obviously, and he reads whenever this minion survives damage, summon a random legendary minion. So, this is just such epic value. You play Rotface, you do a whirlwind effect, you get another legendary, that's two legendaries, you could get more Rotfaces, and then you just get the board gets crazy and you get all these legendaries on the field. But how good are your average legendaries? Well, if we look at this set, they've definitely gotten worse, I would say.
Yes.
Uh, we've we don't have obviously you can't get a legendary minions, right? Last set there were not many legendary minions you would want to play. Spirit Singer Umbra, the Vorax, you know, Patches is a pretty bad legendary minion to get a lot
I
of the
mean,
times from
you've got your
Rotface.
you've got your Lawwalker Cho,
Yeah,
uh,
Cho, Pagel. I mean,
Hagel.
honestly, even Millhouse is like
Not
decent
that
compared
good.
to it. No, but decent compared to a lot
Well,
of the other ones.
4/4. I mean,
Yeah,
you got
but
Tickmaster.
exact. But that's why I'm saying like there's so many bad legendary minions that are just these situational things. Like
Yeah.
I really, everyone thinks oh legendary's great, but like ultimately all you really want to get from this is like the big dragons or another
Yeah.
rot
Or like,
face and
or even like Gruul, or just a really beefy guy, right?
and
Like
and
that's what you want.
And the important thing is Rotface has to survive the damage, right? It's not like you
Yeah.
can play Rotface and then they kill it and you get a legendary. Like if they kill
That would be
Rotface in
decent at
one
least.
go, then you're not getting anything. I honestly I still would not play it even if he didn't have to survive, but the fact that he has to survive just means basically they're screaming whirlwind this, whirlwind this, whirlwind this, and then it's just not that good because random legendaries are not good. And the princes in the set, another example of bad random legendaries to get from this. A
Yeah,
2/2, a
those.
3/3, a 4/4, no thank you.
Yeah, I'll pass on that.
Yeah, I'm gonna pass hard on Rotface. This is a 0 for me. There's not many cards that I think are gonna get 0, but this is a 0. The legendary pool would have to change drastically for this to be good, and that is not where the game is going, based on the kind of legendaries they like have been releasing in recent expansions. So Rotface is gonna get a fat 0 from me. And
I'll
you?
give it one because I can see a world where it's maybe a card.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. That's just being kind. There's not many. I said this is a 1 to 5 scale, and I mean that. I am not gonna rate many things at 0, but Rotface is one of those things. That's how poor I think the card is. Um, and then next we have Bring It On. So this is a warrior spell that got you quite excited, I think. It's a
Yes.
2 mana warrior spell, an epic, and it reads gain 10 armor. That's pretty good. But reduce the cost of of minions in your opponent's hand by 2. So that's a very interesting use for me of the reducing the cost of cards effect by reducing the cost of cards in your opponent's hand as a downside on what is otherwise a pretty powerful effect at 2 mana for 10 armor. Is this a powerful enough effect with the weak enough or with the downside being, a not too much of a downside, do you think, for it to be a good card?
I mean, obviously people compare it to Shield Block. I think it's really powerful. I mean, especially mid to late game. I mean, or against an aggressive deck, your opponent's minions are really cheaper, right? So it's a case of how much benefit do they really get, right?
I
It's
think
kind of
Yeah, like obviously against the aggro decks, 10 armor is a lot, and I think making their minions cheaper probably doesn't isn't so much of a downside because a lot of the times when you're playing, let's say, Control Warrior, which is kind of the only deck we really see this going in, right?
yeah,
Control Warrior, you don't actually want them to flood the board. You want them to actually flood the board so your brawls and your whirlwind, sleep with the fishes, those kind of effects become better, right? So in that sense, encouraging them to flood the board is actually good for you
yeah.
rather than like ultimately the 2 mana cost reduction is not that much of a downside in those matchups. But obviously,
Against control is going
in
to be a
any kind of
problem
control
though.
matchup, it's kind of unplayable. Like we used to see in old Control Warrior mirrors, if you had shield block, you would just not play it, right? Because you didn't want to draw the card in a
Exactly.
lot of times. And Bring It On is pretty much that. It's pretty much unplayable. The best thing you can do is sometimes Bring It On plus Shield Slam, and that's going to kill almost anything, bar a Deathwing, pretty much.
Yeah.
So that's a positive, but ultimately,
That with draw and that with sleep with the fishes, with your board clears, it's not bad, I think. So I expect in a sort of a more grindy, controlly mage, I think.
oh, you mean Warrior, but yeah.
A control warrior mage, yeah, I mean,
But I
sorry,
mean,
yeah.
the big concern as well is for me, like, is Control Warrior really going to be good enough? Is it going to be better than Taunt Warrior? And
I want it
would
to
we
be.
would we play this in Taunt Warrior? Like probably not because there you actually don't want them to flood the board as much, especially after you, let's say, are down to just your hero power and not many cards in hand. Uh, because honestly, against Taunt Warrior, very often people flood anyway because they have to deal with the taunts and because their board kind of sticks because their taunts trade so weakly into a lot of minions. So I don't think Bring It On necessarily has space there as well as it doesn't really help you fulfill your game plan. Whereas for a Control Warrior against a Taunt Warrior, it's terrible, right? There, like,
Yeah,
you want them to flood, sure, but you don't want them to flood because now they're completing their quest, and that's just gonna make it pretty nutty.
yeah, you don't want super. I mean, but yeah, and it's a lot cheaper as well. So the relevance is.
Yeah, well, it just means they can finish their quest like a few turns earlier, and that's very bad in that matchup. So ultimately, I actually don't think Bring It On's particularly good. I'm gonna give it a 3 though because it could see play in a Control Warrior deck that wants to be specifically good against aggro decks. I think in that scenario we described where you actually want your opponent to flood the board is pretty decent. But
Yeah,
other than that, I'm not really convinced on Bring It On. I think it's probably a 3 leaning towards a 2. I think you're probably a little bit higher on it maybe than I am.
yeah, I would please lean to four. It's also a case I like the card, but will it find a deck is the big question.
Yeah.
Like that is lit. Like I like the card, but if there's enough synergies, if a control warrior is viable.
Yeah. And okay, so next, moving on to Dead Man's Hand. This is a 2 mana spell, another epic, and it reads shuffle a copy of your hand into your deck. So another card, we're talking about value, we're talking
Yeah,
about possibly Control Warrior, or it needs to find the right deck really
a
to be,
fatigue warrior.
yeah, to be good.
Uh,
And ultimately, your thoughts on Dead Man's Hand?
it's another card. Like the bring it on. I like the card. I mean, against aggro, it's dead. Obviously, against slower matchups, this is going to be potentially an all star.
Yeah, I mean, there's the dream of using Dead Man's Hand when you have another Dead Man's Hand in your deck, so you can
With
keep getting.
Elise. with
Well,
like
not even that. That's like a greedier dream. But my point is, you can go infinite. You can put infinite cards in your deck, right? But
yeah,
ultimately, people were like, "Oh, it's a way to beat Jade Druid," but you're not really beating Jade Druid like that because they go infinite whilst scaling their minions. Your minions are staying at what they are, so and you can't be playing like yours don't cost one mana for an 8/8, a 9/9, a 10/10, a 30/30 late into the game. So, Dead Man's Hand is not going to help Control Warrior beat J Druid. That's still going to be a really terrible matchup for it. I'm
yeah,
personally most excited about some really interesting weird decks we could get with Dead Man's Hand. We'll see an example I have of that a bit later, which is probably pretty bad, but we'll see. Ultimately, though, I actually don't think Dead Man's Hand is particularly good. I think most cases you don't really need extra copies of your cards in a Control Warrior deck because really all that Control Warrior does right now is about beating aggro, and in those cases, Dead Man's Hand is pretty useless. It's 2 mana, do nothing.
yeah. That's kind of the issue is
Yeah.
like against the right matchup, it's good. Like against other matchups, it's deader than dead. It's not even like a
Haha.
tech card that you can still play as a like a vanilla creature.
Yeah.
It's literally has no use.
Yeah. And the big thing is you have to draw all these cards you put in your deck. And
Yeah.
Warrior kind of struggles for card draw. It's not like you can go Dead Man's Hand with Sprint. Putting Sprint in your deck, and then you can sprint and you can get the next Dead Man's Hand. You can keep sprinting along with your Dead Man's Hands. Like
If
even though you're
only,
spending
right?
your whole turn, right? Like Warrior just doesn't have those cards that allow them to draw multiple cards, right? The best you can do is keep putting shield blocks in your deck, and that's great, but like you're still only drawing one card from that shield block, and you have to draw that shield block. So Warrior kind of struggles there, I think, and that's a big downside to Dead Man's Hand. You want to be able to get through the cards you put in your deck pretty quickly, and you really can't do that with Warrior.
Yeah, I mean, Acolyte is your only real.
Yeah, and then you have to shuffle in cards that can synergize with the Acolyte to deal damage to it,
Exactly.
or like and maybe Battle Rage, but you still have to have minions on the board, and all the draw in Warrior is like it's not neatly packaged in a way that shuffling it in with Dead Man's Hand is
Yeah.
really going to be worth it. Okay, so ultimately, Dead Man's Hand, I'm going to give it a 2. I actually don't think it's going to see much play
Yeah,
in
I want to
many
give it a
real decks.
3. I believe.
Okay, you believe in the value dream.
I
And
believe in the value team.
okay, so I think there's a little star on my 2 in that it could be a really good build around and a really interesting warrior deck, and that's what I'm hoping for. But ultimately, I don't think it's playable in most warrior decks. And then next we have Death Revenant. This is a 5 mana 3/3 rare minion, and it reads Battle Cry, gain +1/+1 for each damaged minion.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, there's going to be like those crazy like children videos where it's absolutely ginormous because you will win your whole board and players,
Well,
but I think
I mean,
it's
the big point here is that it's for your opponent's damaged minions as well, right? So the idea
yeah,
is you can whirlwind Death's Revenant and then like sleep with the fishes or something. But ultimately, when I looked at this card, I was like, but Frostwolf Warlord just is +1/+1 in base stats, and you don't have to damage your minions. So if you're ahead on board, Frostwolf Warlord is always better, and that's a common from Classic. It's 5 mana 4/4 that just gains +1/+1 for each minion you have. Uh, and so Death's Revenant just seems bad to me. That's
yeah. That
that's pretty
that's
much
kind
it.
of that was kind of unfortunately it's like cards like that I just don't believe in because like you require too much to make it work.
Like when minions become damaged, it's so much harder to keep them on the field. Like
Yeah,
even your opponent's minions, like it just doesn't. I don't understand. At 5 mana for the 3/3, like I think to get it to be a 5/5 would maybe be an average scenario, and I just wouldn't play it for that because the potential above that is so weak.
yep.
Yep, that's really all there is to say. Death's Revenant, pretty bad. I'm gonna give it a 1.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 1 as well. Like I'm not a believer.
Yeah, I mean for me it's not quite rot face, but it's pretty bad. Uh, and then next we have a slightly more interesting card and more well costed for its mana cost. This is Mountain Fire Armor. It's a 3 mana 4/3 minion, and it reads Death Rattle. If it's your opponent's turn, gains 6 armor.
So this is an interesting, we've spoken about. It's like sort of a tempo. Like it's not. I don't think it's going to see playing like a control warrior.
Yeah.
Um,
So I would argue that it's not really a very tempo card. The most tempo you get from it is that 4/3 stats is pretty good. For me, really, how I see the card is it's actually pretty good in a race, right? If you're an aggressive deck and they're an aggressive deck, your 3 mana 4/3 puts quite a bit of pressure on them. They want to kill that because, its weakness is its 3 health. But when they kill it, they give you armor. So now that means you have a little bit more leeway in the race for, killing your opponent first. Obviously,
yes,
it's weaker on board, and that's why I say I don't think it's particularly good for tempo because it makes your board weaker. It makes it easier for your opponent to trade, and they just give you a little bit of value if you do trade, and that value comes in the form of health. So to me, it's almost like I kind of read it as almost 3 mana 4/3 life steal. That's kind of basically what it is, except that armor obviously has more synergy because armor is just better than life 99% of the time. There's
yes,
shield slam obviously in warrior, more direct synergy, as well as just the fact that you can go above 30 life with armor.
yes.
So that's kind of how I see Mountain Fire armor. I think you see it in more of like a tempo way, like a bit of
Yeah.
a different.
Well, the fact that if you, yeah, I mean, like you were saying, like if you go in like if you're attacking with it, if you're racing your opponent eventually has to kill it, and they most of the times they're going to lose a minion in the process and give you armor. So it kind of, resets them quite a bit back. It sets them quite a bit further back than you, right, in the race.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna give Mountain Fire armor a 3. I think it could see play in like a mid-range aggressive warrior deck that's not Pirate Warrior. I think that the 3 slots is way too contested in Pirate Warrior for it to see play there, even though I
Yeah,
once again think it is kind of best in those kind of decks. It's not going to be replacing South Sea Captain or Bloodsail Cultist because there's just so much more synergy for those cards, and even Frothing Berserker just does a lot more damage a lot of the time. So I think that's the biggest issue it has is that the 3 slots is quite contested in those decks, and only in a deck that isn't really wanting to do the whole pirate synergy, I think you could work in. But I don't really think that deck's gonna exist. So it actually is like a 3 bordering on a 2 because I don't think the deck exists. But I think the card is good in the right deck, and the deck is not too hard to imagine.
yeah.
Like,
I mean, like we've seen Tempo Warrior like decks before, right?
yeah. But this is we're talking like a more mid-rangey Tempo Warrior deck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And your rating for it?
I would also. I'm going to also go with a 3. Like I think they could find a place in a deck in this current standard. I think it will find a deck. I mean, maybe it might be a new deck. It might be a reworking of an old deck, but I definitely think it will see play because I think it's a solid card.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do. I'm definitely interested in the potential for Tempo Warrior going forward, and that is a deck we will discuss a bit later when we get to our decks for Warrior. But next we have Volkir Soul Claimer. Do you want to tell us a bit about this card?
So Valkyr, what's it? Valkyr Soul Claimer. It's a 3 mana 1/4, and it has whenever this minion survives damage, summon a 2/2 ghoul. So it's like in a way, it's like similar to like the patron. It's like a, patron-like mechanic.
Yeah,
Uh,
except
so
it's not copying itself, so it doesn't really scale.
it
The
doesn't
most
scale,
the
no.
most this can ever do is summon 3 ghouls, and if you're doing that with Whirlwind effects, well, you might be killing some of your ghouls whilst doing that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's obviously the main issue. I mean, a 3 mana 1/4 stats wise isn't exactly amazing either. As we're talking, the one attack, this is not contesting many 2 drops effectively.
Yeah, all 3 drops,
Uh,
or yeah,
oh yeah, it's,
I mean, like,
yeah,
we have Armor Smith, a 2 mana 1/4, and that's not so bad
yeah,
because, but the difference between 2 mana and 3 mana for one attack is really big in terms of what the minion can actually do.
exactly. And and how often is it going to survive? Like against the average 2 drop that's got 2 or 3 attack, that means it's going to get 1/2/2 or 2/2/2s. And
Yeah.
like, is 1/2/2 good enough? Is the
Or if
question.
you're going second, you play Volker Soul Claimer against a Pyro Warrior, they go Korkron, or a Tempo Warrior, they go Korkron. Or you're playing it against Paladin, they go True Silver Champion. These are all clean ways. Like, there's so many clean ways to deal 4 damage on turn 4 that Volker Soul Claimer doesn't even have, like, Death Rattle deal, summon a 2/2, right? It's
Yeah,
not. It's like it has to survive the damage. That's the key point here. So Jade Lightning on the Volkir Soul Claimer, another way to deal 4 damage really cleanly. There's just so many ways I feel, swipe. There's Feral Rage. There's so many ways right now to deal 4 damage. Eviscerate, like we just basically going through classes at ways to deal 4
Yeah,
damage. And
the 1-4 stat line is not amazing.
yeah, I think at 1-5 stat line, maybe we could have seen it see play. But I think really at 1-4, this is really not the payoff for. This is meant to be the payoff for that Whirlwind tempo deck, outside of,
Yeah.
Rotface, lol. Which, this and Death's Revenant, that's what they're going for. They're going for the damage everything on the board with your Whirlwind effects, Scourge Lord, Garrosh, but Valkyr Soul Claimer, it's just underwhelming for me, and I really don't think that the 2/2s are going to be good enough. I mean, the Dream, you play this, you Blood to Ica. Cool. You paid 4 mana
Yeah.
for 2/2/2s and a 1/4,
Well,
1/3.
Inner Rage, right? I mean, Inner Rage is still a card.
Inner Rage is a card, yes. You play this and you can Inner Rage on 3, and then you get a 3/3 for 3 and a 2/2, which is pretty good for tempo, I suppose. You did spend 2 cards to do that, though. I mean, Inner Rage and Cruel Taskmaster are really the possible saving graces for this card.
Yeah, where you
But
combo at the same turn, right?
yeah, but honestly, a lot of the time, I'm just not sure that's gonna work. I'm just not sure that's good enough.
Yeah, I mean that is legitimately a issue.
Yeah, or like Volkya Soulclaimer into Bloodraiser, but then Volkya Soulclaimer actually has to survive, and we'll get to
Yeah.
Bloodraiser. Bloodraiser might be what can allow the deck that has Volkya Soulclaimer into to be a deck, in my opinion. Volkya Soulclaimer might just find space, but a lot of the times I'd rather just play Frothing.
Yeah,
That's
I mean
another
that
minion
is very
that's
true.
that's a minion that gets buffed every time any minion is damaged, and that's just a minion that's gonna hit them for a lot of damage. Like that just seems like a much better payoff for any of these damage effects than Volkya Soulclaimer.
Yeah, that is true as well.
So ultimately, I'm going to give Volca Soul Claimer a 2. I think that even in the deck that it's meant for, I don't think it's good enough. And it could definitely see play if, you really need those extra 2/2 tokens and that extra value versus something like a Frothing. Or it just sees play as another 3 drop alongside Frothing. But that slot is quite contested. We're talking Frothings, Ravaging Ghouls, because that's our card you obviously want in this kind of a deck, and even maybe Mountain Fire Armor that we discussed. So I think that slot is a little bit too contested for me, and I don't think Volkare Soul Claimer is the right card for that. Maybe you play it on a later turn combined with something, but then it's also seeming even weaker. So I'm gonna give it a
Yep.
2. And you? What would your rating?
I think also I would like between 2 and 3, but leaning close to 2, because the payoff is not good enough. I don't think. I don't think isn't. It's just not going to be like you say. I just don't think even with support, it's kind of you need it's a bit happy fairyland.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking of support, we have probably one of the more interesting warrior cards in this expansion, I think, and that's Blood Razor. Blood Razor is a 4 mana 2/2 weapon for warrior, and it has Battle Cry and Death Rattle. Deal 1 damage to all minions. So the Battle Cry and the Death Rattle is basically Whirlwind's effect, and with that you get a 4 mana 2/2 weapon. Now, 4 mana 2/2 weapon is really undercosted, right? That's pretty
Well,
poor.
overcosted, you mean?
Well, sorry, yeah, understated is what I meant.
Yeah,
Yeah,
understand. Yeah.
understated, overcosted. But you are getting the whirlwind effects with it. But we kind of reached that question of how many whirlwind effects are good to have in a deck, right?
Yep.
And Blood Razor, a lot of people say it reminds them of Death Spite. But the big
Yes.
difference between Blood Razor and Death Spite is Death Spite on turn 4 it killed a 4 drop. On turn 5 it killed a 5 drop. Turn 4 it was dealing 4 damage to a single target, and then on turn 5 it's dealing 4 damage to a single target plus 1 damage to everything, so essentially 5 damage to a single target.
Yeah.
And the big difference is Blood Razor is not doing that. Blood Razor is doing 3 damage on turn 4 at maximum to a single target, and then uh, 3 damage again on turn 5 to a single target, whilst doing that whirlwind AoE. And the whirlwind is great, but ultimately I just don't think Blood Razor. I think people are a little bit too hyped on it because of how good Death Spite was.
Yeah. I think it's good, but I don't think it's as good. It's not Dead Spot good.
Yeah, I think it's definitely playable, but I think a lot of the decks that play it are maybe only even going to play one, right? Something you would never think of when you wanted to play Deathspite. I think it is largely going to depend on whether that self whirlwinding kind of deck is good. It's a lot higher value than having to put whirlwinds, in your deck. The one mana spells are not really where you want to be, and so this at least gives you a way of achieving that whirlwind effect alongside stuff like Ravaging Ghoul without having to put the really low value card, like Whirlwind, that's just a terrible top deck, for instance, in your deck. So, maybe Blood Razor helps with a heavy token meta as well. Lots of Whirlwind effects maybe pays off there. There's obviously synergy with Sleep with the Fishes as well, maybe in control decks. But
Yeah,
ultimately,
I like the synergy with Acolyte as
yeah,
well.
Acolytes is a thing. It
Like
curves well
Acolyte
with
into
that as
that.
well. Yeah. As well as, Battle Rage, second turn you attack with it and
Yeah,
you
so
break it.
it's unfortunately it would be nice for it to be have a 3 attack weapon. Would have made it a little bit better, I think.
Yeah, maybe at 4 mana 3/2 it would have been good enough. Maybe it would have been too strong. I think
Yeah,
it's actually a little bit of a difficult weapon to balance, honestly,
yeah,
and
because
a
it
little
will.
bit difficult to evaluate. I'm gonna give it a 3 because I do think it has potential in a bunch of decks, but I'm not sold. It's no Deathbite where Deathbite would probably be getting like a 5.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a 4. I think it's better than what you believe. So I'm going to go and give it a 4. I think the mainly for the slower decks. I mean, I don't think Pirate Warrior wants this weapon,
No,
but Control Warrior, Taunt Warrior, slower warrior decks, I think might want it.
yeah. Okay, and speaking of weapons, uh, next we have a spell which is Forge of Souls. It's a 2 mana warrior common spell, and it reads draw 2 weapons from your deck. So we're getting this specific card draw, kind of, tutory type effect, as we would have
Yeah.
called it from Magic. And in this case, we're drawing 2 weapons from the deck for 2 mana. So your thoughts on this? How good is drawing 2 weapons for 2 mana?
So initially, when I thought it was really, really strong. Right? Draw 2 weapons from fill 2 in your drawers, 2 mana, draw 2 cards. But then when I started thinking about it, and I started asking myself, what weapons am I usually running in a warrior deck? Okay, so naturally, like with the previous card, this is not going in any fast aggro deck.
Yeah,
If anything, this is going in a slower mid range to control. So it's taunt warrior, control warrior, temple warrior, maybe. And what weapons are you running? You're running your 2 war axes, maybe the blood razor, and then maybe a gorehowl. And now the thing is, if you've drawn any of those weapons, now the draw 2 cards become significantly weaker when you already have a weapon because you're just clunking up your hand with weapons, and you can only play 1 weapon at a time. But also, like, what happens then once you've drawn? Let's say if you run 3, 4 weapons, it's just a dead card.
yeah.
So initially, I thought it was really strong, and then when I thought about it, I realized I don't think it's as good as I thought. I think it might still be playable if maybe decks start running more weapons. Like maybe you run double fiery works, double blood razor, and a gorehowl maybe
Yeah, but then how many copies can you play? You can only still really play one copy, right? Because the second
at a
copy is
time.
very unlikely. No, but I mean one copy of Forge of Souls. Like you can
Yeah,
only really play one copy because you don't want to have 2 cards that draw you 2 weapons. So that's 4 weapons. So now you have to have probably 6 to 8 weapons to give your second Forge of Souls the chance of even drawing you 2 cards, and that seems weak to me. I think there needs to be very specific synergy for Forge of
yeah,
Souls, maybe with stuff like Blood Razor, which is a high synergy weapon, right? But
yeah. I don't think you're running more than one copy. And also, like the thing is, you're spending 2 mana to essentially at that time you're doing nothing.
yeah, I mean the weapon can be played that turn if you have enough
It's cheap
mana
enough. Yeah, if you have
and if
mana.
it's cheap enough. But ultimately, the other issue for me that you kind of touched on a little bit is just having 2 weapons in hand is clunky. It's not like you'd play 2 mana to draw 2 minions, right? You can play
Yeah,
both minions at the same time. You can't play both weapons at the same time. You have to play the weapon, use the weapon up, and then play the next weapon to get the full value, right? So we're talking most weapons in Warrior, let's say 2 durability. So you're talking 4 turns to use it. So it's like a high value card, but like really low in terms of showing there's a sort of a maximum number of weapons you really ever want to have in your deck or in your hand, and Forge of Souls is kind of encouraging the bad side of the number of weapons you want.
only potential synergy is if the deck with what's that 6/6 that discard your weapons and you gain stats equal to them.
Oh yeah, yeah, the
I
neutral
mean,
card.
like in some world where that becomes a thing, Forge of Souls, Forge of Souls, and then you know, that guy potentially you can you can potentially have
Well, yeah,
some
you can
massive
summon
six
one
mana.
really big minion for 6 mana,
Exactly.
but then you had to spend earlier turns doing nothing, so now you're not on the
Exactly.
board, and now you're super weak to any single target removal. So yes, I mean you are talking. It is a synergy that we would be remiss not to mention, but we're mentioning it and then firmly putting a really bad stamp on that synergy.
Yeah, I don't know if it'd probably not be good though.
No, that's a bad synergy. Don't do that. Discarding your weapons is bad, but we'll get to that when we get to neutrals. And Forge of Souls is probably not good enough. I'm going to give Forge of Souls a 2. I think that it has potential in decks that want, once again, highly synergistic weapons. You know, cards like Blood Razor, where you really need that weapon in order uh, to achieve what you're trying to do with your deck. But in any other deck, Forge of Souls is a no for me.
Yeah.
And your rating?
I think this is going to be like I think two leaning towards a three. Like I think there'll be there might be a slow enough meta where just being able to filter and draw weapons is not bad.
Yeah, but I mean, we're trying to talk about the upcoming meta, right? Not like
Upcoming meta,
in two
maybe.
expansions or
I
whatever.
don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about it
Yeah,
because I think objectively it's not a bad card. Drawing two cards for 2 mana is not bad.
but those two cards are not really two cards a lot of the time.
Yeah,
Like often weapons are more than one card, but in this case, like too many weapons is not two cards. Yeah, weapons are actually quite confusing in sort of how to evaluate them and their usage, which is also why I think Blood Razor is difficult to evaluate in this scenario.
yeah.
Anyway, so getting on to the final warrior card, we have Animated Berserker. So this is a 1 mana 1/3 common minion, and it reads after you play a minion, deal 1 damage to it. So clearly screaming Valkyr, Soul Claimer synergy. This is for the damage your minions and
Battle
maybe get a
Rage
big
deck.
Death Revenant, yeah, get Battle Rage. I mean, Battle Rage is an actually good synergy with that effect of damaging your minions, but
Yeah,
Animated Berserker, the dream, you go Animated Berserker, coin, Acolyte of Pain. Yay, you got a 1/2 and you got to draw a card. Uh, I am very much not sold on Animated Berserker. I'm not sure damaging your minions is good. I,
yeah,
I mean, we are talking maybe Blood Warriors or Sudden Genesis, or there's some kind of other synergies for having damaged minions like that, right? But ultimately, for me, Animated Berserker, the best thing about it, it's a 1 mana 1/3.
yeah. So that's why it's not bad. That's kind of also the kind of the thing the redeeming thing I kind of did see. I kind of figured it is the fact that yes, it's a 1/3, which is decent minion. It's decent stat to contest the early board, right?
But then if you're contesting the early board and now you're ahead on the board, then you play your minions and now your minions after that are weaker. So
Yeah,
even though this minion has a higher stat health than you would expect minions to have, 1 drops. I mean 1/3 is on the high end of one mana cost minions. It's just not good enough because it makes your other minions have lower stats, lower health, right?
exactly.
You can't snowball the board with this because it makes the rest of your board weaker, as well as, in any mirror match or against Control Warrior or Taunt Warrior, it makes your board weaker to sleep with the fishes and effects like that.
Yeah,
So ultimately, I think Animated Berserker is going to get a 2 for me, and that's the only redeeming factor is its stat line. Maybe it has some kind of synergy in that um, Tempo Warrior deck that wants to damage its minions. Okay, maybe a 3. Like, I'll give it a 3, but it's a 3 leaning on the 2 low end for
yeah.
me.
I have to agree there.
Yeah. So you're also going to be a 3.
Yeah, three lean towards a two though.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
when I saw the card, I was like, okay, I see what they're trying to do. I'm not buying it.
Yeah. And then next we have the decks that we're going to be discussing. So we've been discussing some of the concepts a lot: Control Warrior, Tempo Warrior, and Bad Dead Man's Hand Warrior. And those are what we have for you here. Firstly, we have Pandemonia's Control Warrior on the left side here. So what's the idea behind this warrior? What's interesting in this warrior? Why would this Control Warrior be viable when Control Warrior hasn't been viable previously?
So this is like, once again sort of a splat of the old school Control Warrior. Basically, the early game it's about surviving and stalling until you get to late game to use big threats. So in this case, your threats are going to be I don't know, the Scourge Lord Garrosh. I think actually I should probably add Garrosh Grom back in.
Yeah,
Uh,
probably
I,
better to
I,
have Grom, honestly.
Yeah, and then like the Lich King is kind of like a mini, like I think of it similar to Ysera in a way. And then Elise is, that long game, eventually. And then I've included Dead Man's Hand as a sort of, if you can get that with like an Elise, you can hopefully win, you can outlast your opponent.
Yeah, with
But
either Elise herself or with the pack that she gives you.
yeah, or the Lich King, any of the Lich King cards as well, potentially you can get value.
Yeah. Like I can
So
definitely see Dead Man's Hand here as a single thing just to give you a little bit more value in the late game. I think the interesting stuff here is like Blood Razor is pretty good in this deck, right?
I
Like
think
the
so.
idea is it sets up your Sleep with the Fishes, your Executes. It also
Your
is
Acolytes,
yeah, it's good because it helps against the token, the aggro token decks, which is
and your
sort of
Bloodroot
what we
Braves
see
as
a lot of
well.
these decks. Yeah, Bloodhoof Braves and yeah, the Acolytes and you're not really playing any Battle Rages, which ultimately might be a little bit better than some of the other
Yeah,
cards, but
yeah.
I can
The problem
definitely
is you
see
might
why.
not have enough minions though. That's the issue, right?
Exactly.
You might not have enough minions to get synergy with the Battle Rage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've included Scourge Lord Garrosh. I'm not quite sure. I think I should probably run Grom instead, but you
Yeah,
know,
probably. Grom is also obviously synergy with Blood Razor as a finisher, right?
yeah,
You can do 12 damage that turn
exactly.
by attacking you using your second charge of Blood Razor and enraging your Grom in the process.
Yeah, exactly.
So that is definitely synergy. I definitely think Control Warrior could be a thing. The biggest concern for me is why would I play Control Warrior over Taunt Warrior?
Yeah,
Taunt
that's the
Warrior
thing.
still has the greater inevitability, and I think that's why a lot of these cards like Bring It On and stuff I just don't think are very good. Um, Really, it's just like, why? What am I doing with this deck? I think the only thing you're doing is you're bringing a deck that can target aggro, right? In, let's
Yeah,
say, a Conquest lineup, you want to target aggro or something like that, right? It's a specific tech choice in tournaments for me. Not really something am likely to see playing on ladder unless I'm a huge Control Warrior fan like yourself.
cough cough Fibonacci.
Or that, yeah, or Fibonacci. I'll be interested to see what Fibonacci comes up with for his control warriors, and
Yeah,
how he uses cards like Blood Razor and Lich King possibly too, or even just a Stonehill Defender to discover the Lich King. Um,
exactly.
but yeah, moving on, we have a Temper Warrior deck that you've given us as well here. So what's the down low on this Temper Warrior?
It's trying to basically once again, like I'm not exactly a great deck innovator. So what I basically do, I look at previous decks and I go, okay, what new cards could fit into. So this is basically taking sort of the older Tempo Warrior lists, with the Frothy Berserker, Malkarok, Grom, and then basically saying, okay, which cards, could maybe be outclassed. So that's why now, you'll see I include cards like the Mountain Fire Armor, because I think it really fits into the idea of this, into the idea of Tempo Warrior.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's another good 3 drop to play on three,
Yeah,
like Frothy
and the
Berserker.
same with Blood Razor. I think it synergizes very well with the deck.
Yeah,
Scourgeless Gareth. I mean, you've got the whirlwind effect, but also, I mean, it's a finisher. That weapon is potentially just game ending. I
yeah.
mean, you just clear that board quite quickly.
Yeah, the weapon is massive for just making sure you have control of the board. The biggest concern there for me is that your deck might be a little heavy on weapons with Melkorok, the double Blood Razor,
Yeah, I mean that's always a possibility as well.
the
But I mean, I think you
Forax,
use
but
your weapons quite aggressively though, so
yes,
I
yes.
don't think that's too much of a problem.
No, no, I do agree. I do agree. Overall, it's probably not that bad. Blood Razor's the concern is, just because,
Is it good
um,
enough?
well, it's also the second charge you use a little bit more conditionally, right?
Yeah,
Because there's going to be scenarios where it's not that good to use the second charge. But ultimately, I really do like the idea of Temper Warrior. I'm a little bit not sold on actually putting Whirlwinds in the deck when you have
yeah.
Ravaging Ghouls and Blood Razor, to be honest,
That could probably be
as well
another
as
slam.
even Scourge Lord. Well, what I would have actually liked, and the list that I built but didn't really, we just decided to end up using your list, was um, using uh, what's it? Cruel Taskmaster
Oh
again, right?
yes, yeah. So
It's good
instead
for
of
activating your stuff, and it gives the damage buff that can help with
Yeah,
even
instead of
something
the
like
two
Garrosh.
whirlwinds, I could probably put in a cruel taskmaster and maybe even another slam or two cruel taskmasters.
Yeah.
Actually, might be better.
The,
Yeah,
the other biggest concern I have with Tempo Warrior is how does it actually control the early game, right? How does it control? Like, it looks great if you start looking from 3 on. That synergy looks good, and that looks pretty valuable. It's got some good burst. But how does it actually control those first 3 turns that are so
fire
crucial?
wax.
Yeah, so your whole deck now is really reliant on Fiery
But
War Axe.
that's
Like,
has that not been most like many warrior decks have been reliant on that, right? To be
sure, but
fair.
but that's why it's not probably good enough because that's not
Yeah,
consistent enough. The other thing I was considering and a deck I built, which maybe I'll put in the description, but I'm not gonna we're not bringing it up, is because it really barely had any new cards in. To be honest, was a sort of elemental tempo warrior deck, simply because like Firefly and Blaze Caller are really good, right?
Yeah.
So Firefly may be a good way to start. Maybe instead of Blood to Ica, even Firefly into Cruel Taskmaster is a way to control the board as well. You get
Yeah.
that 3/1 that can trade. Like it is has some use there, as well as also providing some ways to contest some of the other early starts from, let's say, the token decks and whatnot. But yeah, that early game is the big concern for me with with any of the tempo warrior decks. I think when it gets to the from turns 3 into 4, if you have the board or you are
On
on the
deck.
board, then it's good. Like I think that
Yeah.
the deck definitely could be viable. Okay, so next we have a deck that is probably not viable, and the idea with this deck, so this is a deck of mine that the idea is basically you have Arcane Giants, Dead Man's Hand, and like Blood Warriors as well, right? So the idea is you can be shuffling in tons of Arcane Giants, and then you have cards like Gadgets and Auctioneer to actually cycle through all those cards, right? So the deck is basically full of lots of cheap spells. You've got your commanding shouts to pair with your wild pyromancers, acolyte of pain to help draw with that synergy as well as the gadgets and auctioneer. So we've got really cheap spells like Ironhide, 1 mana, gain 5 armor from Journey to Ungoro, a card that's really barely seen play. We've got Inner Rage, the only real 0 mana cost spell for Warrior. Just decent with Acolytes, decent with Arcane Giants to get Blood Warriors. It's got a single Blood Warriors. We're talking one Whirlwind. Eventually, I only had one in. Slam. This whole deck is basically like
Value
really.
and
It's pretty
cards.
much just everything is 3 mana or less, except for a single copy of Blood Razor, two Gadget Hands, and the Arcane Giants. And the Arcane Giants you should be playing at really low mana. So the idea is that this deck should hopefully be able to contest with some of the token decks. Originally I also had like Ravaging Ghouls in and stuff, but ultimately I cut them to make space for more spells. Another card that you could put in this deck is Yogg. You can Dead Man's Hand whilst you have Yogg in your hand, get more Yoggs.
Dog
Uh,
warrior boys.
yeah, it could really be like a Yogg sort of spell warrior. That's basically what this is, right? It has
Yeah.
Armorsmith, Acolyte, Gadgets and Auctioneer, and Arcane Giant, and Wild Pyromancer. Those are the only minions in. Otherwise, everything else is pretty much spells, right? And the idea is that you can somehow control the board with the weapons and the spells and get some crazy Dead Man's Hand. But really, I don't think this deck is very good. It's just an interesting concept that I thought was worth discussing and worth maybe trying, and maybe where Dead Man's Hand can see some play. But yeah, ultimately, not a deck I would encourage anyone to actively go out and craft any cards for. But if you have the cards for, maybe you want to try it. Sort of inspired by some of the previous.
Yeah. Oh, who brought it to BlizzCon? Was it Hot
It was
Meowth?
Hot Meowth played some, but that's not the
Something.
deck that inspired. Really, this was more inspired by the Worgen OTK decks we used to see that was running a lot of spells and yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, another card that could have maybe seen play in this deck is Charge. The big concern is that this deck doesn't have like a nice OTK way to finish, and Charge now, the fact that you can't charge or the minion that you charge can't attack heroes means that you can't like OTK or even burst with it, like for that scenario. But charge could see play to help control the board as well as just synergize a bit more with cheap spells. Charge, gadgets, and auctioneer hype. But yeah, ultimately warrior with no preps, no coins, nothing like that. It makes it a lot trickier to use gadgets and auctioneer. Another consideration I had was burgly bully, if you can play it and actually get some coins from it. But ultimately, I decided that was not really reliable enough, and I needed space for a lot of the other spells. So, yeah, probably a bad deck. That's why I'm calling it Bad Warrior. But ultimately, I think an interesting concept of maybe where something like Dead Man's Hand could go. So, after all of this, where are you feeling about Warrior? Obviously, we haven't spoken about Pyro Warrior and Taunt Warrior. They're in decks that are not really going anywhere.
Yeah, I think
I think
Warrior's
they're
still
both
gonna be up
okay.
there.
Yeah,
Uh,
Warrior, I think, much like Druid that we discussed in the last, The
It's still got all
existing
the tools.
archetypes, they're still going to exist. I don't think they're going anywhere. Taunt Warrior is still pretty good against a lot of control decks if we do go into like a control meta that is always fabled when we're looking at cards before an expansion.
Yeah.
And Pirate Warrior, good aggro deck, maybe a little bit, you
I
know,
mean, they might get a card or two, but I don't foresee the list changing off
yeah,
that quickly.
not of the warrior cards in particular. And honestly, I think Pirate Warrior might get a little bit weaker as we've seen some more tools to help deal with those kind of
Yeah.
pure aggro decks, I would say. So yeah, Warrior overall though, I think is still going to be in a decent position. Not tier one because I think Taunt Warrior has a lot of weaknesses as well, like Jade Druid. Maybe Warrior I think is going to be in that like tier one, tier two, maybe edging tier one if there's enough aggro decks for Taunt Warrior to take advantage of, or maybe it goes a bit greedier with their Taunt Warrior builds to help against the control decks. So I think
Yeah.
Warrior is going to be in a pretty good place but not really based on any of the new cards and per se. Maybe Blood Razor is probably the big interesting thing for a lot of the warrior decks, and maybe Mountain Fire Armor. I think Tempo Warrior is the one to watch out for as a new
Yeah,
warrior
that's
deck.
kind of the hopeful things is.
Yeah, that's the hope for some more innovation in terms of warrior. But even that's just kind of going back to an older warrior archetype. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think warrior is not going to be looking too bad. Um, Overall, I think warrior players will be pretty happy. They're going to have fair amount of variation in warrior, not something we've seen too much in recent times. So yeah, I think Warrior is going to be pretty good. Uh, that's all we really have for this Warrior review. You can find us on Twitter. If you have any comments about Warrior or any of the other classes that we've done, we're going to be uh, pumping out all these videos for all the classes before release. So a lot more videos are going to be on the way, and it's pretty exciting. I'm definitely looking forward to the expansion. Let us
Yep.
know your thoughts on the expansion, the cards, anything. Like, follow on Twitter, YouTube, subscribe there. It all really helps. So thanks a lot.
Yep. Cheers.
Cheerio.